Before there was SkyTrain, before cars clogged the roads, and before buses crisscrossed the lower mainland, electric trains ruled British Columbia's cities and suburbs. From the clatter of streetcars on Hastings Street to the long lonely runs of the interurban cars through the Fraser Valley, the BC Electric Railway didn't just move people, it built cities, connected industries, and brought power to British Columbia. In 1881, British Columbia's population was a meager 49,000 people. With residents spread throughout the vast province, the primary settlements were Victoria, New Westminster, interior gold rush towns, Nanaimo, and small settlements along the Fraser River. With the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885, BC began to experience much more growth, with its population reaching 93,000 by 1890. With the railway came jobs. It spurred economic development in industries like logging, mining, and fishing, attracting further settlement and investment. New towns sprang up rapidly along the Canadian Pacific Railway's path, and existing settlements thrived, especially Vancouver, the CPR's western terminus. As the population grew and spread out from the core town centers, effective interurban transport became absolutely critical for moving people and goods to their destinations. While the railway brought goods and passengers to these major hubs, the only way to reach outlying areas was still by foot, horse-drawn carriage, or water transportation. It was slow and often quite difficult. But then, a game-changer arrived: electricity. As it was slowly introduced to the region in the late 1800s, a brand new form of rapid transit became a real option for British Columbia. The province's first streetcar system launched in Victoria by the National Electric Tramway and Lighting Company on February 22, 1890. Vancouver quickly followed suit. The Vancouver Electric Railway and Light Company launched the city's streetcar system a few months later, on June 27th of the same year. Then came the Westminster and Vancouver Tramway Company. They launched New Westminster streetcar system on October 8, 1891. In that same year, they also established the New Westminster-Vancouver Interurban line, connecting the two cities via Central Park and Burnaby. However, the global depression of 1890s hit hard. All three of these pioneering companies went into receivership. By 1895, they were amalgamated into a single entity, the Consolidated Railway and Light Company. But tragedy struck. Following a devastating streetcar accident in Victoria at the Point Ellis Bridge, an event that tragically resulted in 55 deaths, the Consolidated Company itself went into receivership. It was a dark moment, but from this reorganization emerged what became known as the British Columbia Electric Railway Company in April 1897. The company went to work expanding and modernizing the network. Initially, both Victoria and Vancouver relied on local coal-fired steam plants to power their streetcar systems. The Victoria Tram network pulled electricity from the National Electric Tramway and Light Company powerhouse, a two-story brick industrial building located close to the south bank of Rock Bay in the upper harbour of Victoria. In Vancouver, the plant was located on Union Street just west of Main Street. In 1898, the BC Electric Railway built its first hydroelectric plant at Goldstream near Victoria. This was followed several years later when Powerhouse No. 1 at Bunsen Lake started producing electricity on December 17, 1903, making it the Lower Mainland's first hydroelectric generating station. With a seemingly unlimited supply of hydroelectric power, BC Electric began expanding streetcar and interurban routes throughout the Lower Mainland. To meet the growing demand for transportation, they operated two types of electric rail service: streetcars and interurbans. Streetcars were the city buses of their day, small, nimble, and designed for local service with stops every few blocks in places like Vancouver, New Westminster, and Victoria. Interurbans were the SkyTrain of the era, faster, larger electric trains designed for long-distance travel between towns and cities. They shared streetcar tracks downtown, then moved on to their own dedicated tracks outside the city for higher speeds and fewer stops. Both systems ran on overhead wires powered by the company's expanding grid of hydroelectric plants. But the electricity didn't stop at the tracks. As BC Electric extended its lines into new areas, it also brought electrical service to farms, homes, and businesses along the way. The same infrastructure that powered the railways delivered modern lighting and electric conveniences to communities for the first time. Outside the areas served by the BC Electric Railway, electricity distribution remained scattered and unreliable. Many remote towns and rural areas still relied on small generators or private utilities, with some places waiting decades for dependable service. But one place that didn't wait around was Nelson. Determined to modernize, the city launched its own hydroelectric project on February 1, 1896 at Cottonwood Creek, the first hydro plant in British Columbia, beating Victoria's Goldstream plant by 2 years. With reliable power in place, Nelson established the Nelson Electric Tramway Company, starting regular streetcar service on December 27, 1899. This made Nelson one of the province's first cities with an electric streetcar system, ahead of many of BC Electric's interurban expansions, and helped cement its nickname, the Queen City of the Kootenays. While Nelson built its own independent tramway system, in Victoria, New Westminster, and Vancouver, the BC Electric Railway was rapidly expanding both its local streetcar lines and its longer-distance interurban network. These electric railways didn't just connect neighborhoods and towns, they shaped how cities grew, where industry settled, and how everyday British Columbians lived, commuted, and did business. Before we dive into the major interurban lines, let's quickly take a look at the streetcar systems that laid the groundwork in the cities. Over the decades following its opening in 1890, the streetcar network expanded across downtown, Beacon Hill Park, and the Gorge Waterway, becoming Victoria's preferred way to commute and socialize. Busy weekend trips kept the line bustling through the early 20th century. New Westminster's system became tightly integrated with both local neighborhoods and the growing interurban lines. It connected outlying areas of New West with residential areas and down to Columbia Street and the waterfront, making it easy for people to travel across town or transfer to long-distance interurbans. Vancouver's streetcar system expanded rapidly as new suburbs like Mount Pleasant, Kerrisdale, and Kitsilano developed. Running along key corridors like Granville, Hastings, and Main Street, it became one of Western Canada's largest streetcar systems by the 1920s, carrying tens of thousands of passengers daily and making commuting to downtown convenient for growing neighborhoods. It's worth noting that while North Vancouver operated its own streetcar network for most of its history through the North Vancouver Municipal Railway, service was briefly run by the BC Electric Railway when the line first opened in 1906, before the city assumed control in 1908. Victoria had the first interurban line in British Columbia, opening in 1890 to connect downtown Victoria with the Esquimalt Naval Yard. While technically an interurban, it operated more like a streetcar line, with frequent stops along the route. It was eventually absorbed into the growing Victoria streetcar network. In 1913, BC Electric extended the interurban line north into Saanich, reaching Deep Cove, known locally as Deep Bay at the time. The route became popular for weekend excursions to destinations like Elk Lake, Cordova Bay, and Bouchard Gardens. The Central Park Line was the first interurban route in the Lower Mainland. Opened in 1891, it connected downtown Vancouver to New Westminster, passing through Burnaby's Central Park along the way. This line became the backbone of the system, carrying commuters, shoppers, and freight between two rapidly growing cities. With frequent stops in densely populated neighborhoods, it served as the primary artery for daily travel in the Lower Mainland. Beyond passenger traffic, the Central Park Line was crucial for moving freight like lumber, coal, and manufactured goods between Vancouver's ports and inland markets. Its central location and heavy use made it the busiest and most important route in the company's network. The Lulu Island Line opened in 1905, linking Vancouver to Steveston by way of Marpole and Richmond. Rather than laying entirely new track, the BC Electric Railway leased and electrified the CPR's existing Arbutus right-of-way. From Vancouver, the line ran south through Kerrisdale, crossed the north arm of the Fraser River via swing bridge at Marpole, and then followed Garden City Road, Granville Avenue, and Railway Avenue down to the fishing village of Steveston. This line quickly became essential for the region's farming and fishing industries. It moved Richmond's berries, produce, and milk to Vancouver markets, while hauling workers to Steveston's busy canneries and shipyards. During salmon season, the cars would be so packed with cannery workers, The locals nicknamed it the Cannery Special. The Westminster-Eburn line opened in 1909, connecting Vancouver to New Westminster by way of Marpole and the south side of Burnaby. It branched off the Lulu Island line at Marpole and followed the north bank of the Fraser River, running through industrial areas and farmland before reaching New Westminster. This line served both freight and passenger traffic, providing a crucial link for communities and industries along the river. Though not as heavily traveled as the Central Park Line, it played a vital role in supporting the rapid industrial growth along the Fraser River. Its proximity to sawmills, factories, and docks made it a workhorse for the BC Electric Railway's freight business, while still offering regular passenger service. The Fraser Valley Line was the longest interurban route in Canada, stretching over 100 kilometers from New Westminster to Chilliwack. To keep the interurban cars running smoothly, ensuring a steady source of power across such long distances, the BCER built 5 substations along the route. These facilities converted high-voltage alternating current carried through transmission lines into 600-volt direct current for the overhead wires. 2 of these original substations still stand today: the Coghlan Station, just north of Aldergrove, and another, the Vetter Mountain Substation, south of Chilliwack, at the base of Vetter Mountain. The line made constant stops at farms and rural stations, hauling fresh dairy, local produce, and mail alongside its passengers. In peak harvest season, cars would be packed with freight as Fraser Valley farmers relied on the Interurban to move their goods to Vancouver markets. With long stretches of open track and express runs that could make the trip in under 3 hours, it was one of the company's fastest and busiest rural lines. Over 30 small drops dotted the route, some little more than a nameboard in a clearing. Despite its reputation for constant stops, it was a lifeline for farmers and gave isolated communities dependable access to the city. The Burnaby Lake Line was originally planned to spark a major suburban development around Burnaby Lake, but when the economy slowed around 1912, development stalled, and the line never became the bustling corridor it was meant to be. Instead, it earned a reputation as the system's dark horse, acquired a more scenic route favored by locals escaping the city bustle. Running alongside parks and open spaces, it stood in contrast to the busier Central Park Line cutting through the heart of Burnaby. By the end of the Second World War, British Columbia's cities were changing. The post-war economic boom saw thousands of returning soldiers, a growing middle class, and the rapid rise of car ownership. The streets, once dominated by clanging streetcars, were now filling with private automobiles, trucks, and city buses. The rigid nature of the streetcar systems, confined to fixed rails and overhead wires, no longer suited the needs of sprawling car-friendly suburbs. Buses could go where the tracks never reached. They were cheaper to operate, easier to reroute, and didn't require the constant maintenance of track work. This shift towards buses and the phasing out of streetcars was a coordinated effort known as the Rails to Rubber program. Many of Vancouver's existing overhead wire systems were retained and adapted for the new electric trolley buses, a system that continues operating to this day and one of the largest in North America after Mexico City and San Francisco. While it allowed transit to expand into new areas and adapt to changing urban layouts, it also marked the removal of streetcar rails and the end of a transit era that had defined British Columbia's urban growth for over half a century. By the late 1940s, the golden age of British Columbia's interurban rails was also coming to an end. As car ownership soared and road infrastructure rapidly expanded, passenger numbers on the interurban steadily declined. It wasn't that people stopped traveling, they just preferred the freedom and convenience of driving their own car. As ridership declined, BC Electric began cutting back interurban service. One by one, the electric lines were shut down and replaced with buses following the same routes. 1924 saw the first closure, with Victoria to Saanich interurban line closing after just 11 years of service due to declining ridership. The first to close on the mainland was the Burnaby Lake Line. Originally envisioned to spark a suburban community around the lake, it never achieved the traffic its planners had hoped for. By the 1950s, it was abandoned entirely. The right-of-way it once occupied didn't sit idle for too long. In the 1960s, its alignment was repurposed to form a portion of Highway 1 cutting through Burnaby. The Central Park Line, Once the backbone of the interurban system met a different fate. Its former route would eventually be resurrected decades later as the Expo line of the SkyTrain system, perhaps the most visible legacy of the interurban line itself, a modern electric rapid transit system that followed the very same corridor BC Electric interurbans once traveled. As the interurban era came to an end, the company was left with hundreds of obsolete streetcars and interurban cars. Preservation wasn't a priority. Instead, the company took a far more ruthless approach. Most were brought to the Kitsilano car barn, doused with fuel, and set ablaze. It was faster and cheaper than dismantling them, and at the time, no one believed these relics of BC transit history would ever be worth saving. Today, only a handful of these railway cars survive in museums and private collections, cherished relics of a once vast system that quite literally built the shape of the modern Lower Mainland. BC Electric continued to operate its sprawling bus network and hydroelectric utilities into the 1960s until the provincial government stepped in. In 1961, Premier W.A.C. Bennett's government moved to nationalize BC Electric. Bennett, determined to bring British Columbia's essential utilities under public control, passed legislation expropriating the company's assets. In March 1962, BC Electric officially became part of a new public crown corporation, BC Hydro and Power Authority. BC Hydro inherited the company's bus operations as well, continuing to run public transit services across the Lower Mainland until the early 1980s, when BC Transit was created to take over. The move wasn't just about politics. It was a practical response to the province's growing appetite for electricity. BC Hydro inherited not only BC Electric's dams and distribution network, but also its power generating expertise and infrastructure stretching from Vancouver Island to the Fraser Valley. BC Hydro would go on to reshape British Columbia's energy landscape, building massive new projects and extending the reach of reliable electricity to every corner of the province, a legacy that began with the flicker of streetcar lights back in 1890. While the last interurban cars made their final runs in the 1950s, their story isn't completely over. A few reminders of British Columbia's electrical railway era are still with us, preserved by volunteers and dedicated local museums. In Cloverdale, the Fraser Valley Heritage Railway Society has brought a piece of the old Fraser Valley line back to life. Since 2013, they've operated restored BC Electric interurban cars, including car 1225, along a section of track between Cloverdale and Sullivan Station in Surrey. It's one of the only places in Western Canada you can still climb aboard a working interurban. Over in Burnaby, the Burnaby Village Museum maintains a faithfully restored BC Electric interurban station, along with restored interurban car 1223. Though no active line runs through here today, the museum preserves an important piece of what was once a thriving electric rail network. And down by the waterfront in Steveston, you'll find another important survivor, Interurban car 1220. It's on static display, a reminder of the busy days when the Lulu Island line carried cannery workers, farmers, and families to and from Vancouver. On June 20th, 2024, a piece of the line was severely damaged. The Marpole Bridge, originally built in 1902 and one of the last remaining structures the interurbans actually ran on, caught fire and suffered heavy damage. As an unused asset of the CPR since 2014, it's only a matter of time before we lose this piece of history forever. Even in recent memory, the streetcar made a brief comeback. During the 2010 Winter Olympics, a modern streetcar line, the Olympic Line, operated between Granville Island and Olympic Village. Two state-of-the-art Bombardier Flexity streetcars on loan from Brussels carried passengers along a short stretch of track laid on an old railway right-of-way. Though it was only a temporary demonstration, it proved that there's still public interest and space in Vancouver for rail transit at street level. As for the future of interurban travel, the idea resurfaces every few years. Rising traffic congestion, higher fuel costs, and growing environmental concerns keep sparking calls to revive the commuter rail service into the Fraser Valley. Proposals to reactivate portions of the old BC Electric right-of-way for modern light rail or commuter trains have made the rounds, though none have broken ground. Still, The influence of those long-gone electric lines is everywhere. In the routes our roads follow, in the neighborhoods that grew around the old tracks, and in the infrastructure repurposed for today's SkyTrain. The rails may be gone, but their impact on how British Columbia grew and the spark of innovation they brought still lingers.